Another hot topic of debate in international scenario throughout the world is the USA tariffs on the goods imported from other countries. So, the very topic that we would like to discuss in this lecture, we entitled it as Liberation Day Tariffs, as the new tariff regimes of United States is imposed on the very Liberation Day on April 2, 2025. So before discussing the April 2 Liberation Day tariffs, we would like to go to the background of the USA tariffs, which ultimately imposed over 180 countries on the April 2nd, 2025. So, regarding the very background that we found United States President Donald Trump's tariffs on trading fatness were ignited a global trade war, especially targeting China, Canada, and Mexico, and also which included 25% tariffs on automobiles imported to the United States. However, levying tariffs is not a new development under the Donald Trump administration. During his first term, the United States was also engaged in a trade war with China, and in his second term, Donald Trump is adopting a similar strategy. So, in that regard, we would like to discuss that on his first day in office during his second term. Trump also said that he would impose 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico starting on February 1, 2025, while declining to immediate elaborate plans to tax Chinese imports. On January 26, one major event happened, and that was the Colombian President Gustavo Petro rejected two US military aircraft over the ill treatment of immigrants. In response, Trump threatened 25% tariff on Colombian imports. The Colombian President Gustavo Petro announced a 25% increase in tariffs on USA products as a retaliatory measure. However, this decision was later reversed, and on February 1, the USA President signed an exclusive order imposing tariffs on goods from Mexico, Canada, and in particularly a 10% tariff was also levied on imports from China and 25% on goods from Mexico and Canada. All three countries announced retaliatory measures against the executive order of the United States President. And on February 3, Trump halted his decision on tariffs against Mexico and Canada for 30 days as both countries assured to address concerns about drug trafficking and food security. And on February 4, a 10% tariff on Chinese goods imported to the USA has not come into effect. As a retaliatory measure, China imposed a new set of duties on USA goods and launched an anti-monopoly investigation into gold. And as on February 10, 25% tariff was imposed on steel and aluminium. So Trump announced an increase in tariffs on steel and aluminium and removed exemptions introduced in 2018 from March 12 onwards, and steel imports would be charged at least 25%. Aluminium tariffs also increased to 25% from 10% as it was in 2018. And exactly on February 13, the Donald Trump administration announced plans for reciprocal tariffs to hike U.S. tariffs to match the tax rates imposed by its trading partners for the purposes of fairness. So, on on March 4, 20% tariffs on imposed on Chinese goods, tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico came into effect with levies on Chinese goods, which were doubled to 20%. So the then Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced tariffs on over $100 billion worth of US goods in 21 days. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum also said her country would respond with retaliatory tariffs on US goods. Meanwhile, China levied 15% tariff on a range of farm products. The USA President granted a 1 month exemption from tariffs on goods imported from Mexico and Canada, benefiting USA automakers. And exactly on March 10, in response to Donald Trump's 20% tariffs, China imposed an additional 15% tariffs on US products including chicken, pork, soybeans, and beef. However, China's Commerce Ministry stated that goods already in transit would be exempted from the retaliatory tariffs until April 12. And exactly on March 12, 25% tariff was imposed on European Union. Donald Trump increased tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports to 25%. In response, the European Union announced retaliatory duties on USA products, including steel, aluminum, goods, textile, home appliances, motorcycles, bourbon, peanut butter, and jeans. And on March 13, Trump threatened to impose 200% tariff on European wine, champagne, and spirits if the European Union levied a 50% tariff on American whiskey. And on March 25, 20% tariff on countries buying oil and gas from Venezuela was declared by Donald Trump, announced the imposition of a 25% tariff on countries buying oil or gas from Venezuela from April 2. So, exactly on March 24, this was announced by Donald Trump. So, in response to that, exactly on March 26, the Donald Trump administration also announced a 25% tariff on auto imports, aiming to boost domestic manufacturing. However, the move has raised concern among the automakers who depend on global supply chains for manufacturing. So, these are the tariff regimes which were imposed by the second Donald Trump administration from the month of February to month of end of March 2025. In response to that also, retaliatory tariffs were imposed by Canada, also by Mexico, China and other European countries. And on the very April 2, which you consider as the Liberation Day in United States, President Trump made a country-specific tariffs varying from 10% to 54%. And India has been slapped with a 26% rate can push investment in countries with lower tariff disadvantages. So, in 2024, as India exported over $80 billion worth of goods to USA with a trade surplus of $36.4 billion. To India's worried business people, a 26% tariff, country-specifying tariff on India is steep, but it appears moderate compared to the tariffs imposed on Vietnam, 46%, and on China, 54%. So, on ranging from 10% to 54%, those tariffs were imposed on April to over 180 countries. So, in specific, in response to that, a White House chat indicates that Cambodia imposing 97% tariffs on USA goods, also Vietnam is imposing 90% of tariff on USA goods, while China is imposing 67% tariffs on USA goods. So, we would like to discuss in that connection that our neighboring country, Bangladesh, which was imposed by the USA Trump administration a 37% of tariffs on the imports of goods from Bangladesh. So now the very topic that we would like to discuss, that is the tariff of US and India. So that we would like to discuss, and who else adds that textile and garments, electronics and telecom, diamonds and jewelry in the field of agriculture, pharmaceuticals. So the Trump sweeping tariff action creates mixed outcome for Indian exports. India may gain a relative advantage in select sectors, but gains won't be automatic. Total tariff charge from April 9 will be a sum of the existing US tariffs and the new country specific tariffs. So, in the field of textile and garments, are well positioned to benefit the US tariffs, reduce competitiveness of rivals like China and Bangladesh. However, India must reform labor laws and enable large-scale production to fulfill capitalize on this opening. And in the field of electronics and telecom, steep tariffs on Vietnam and Thailand create space for India, but limited domestic value addition and high component imports dilute competitiveness. Tariff exemptions on 28 mobile components in the latest budget of the central government may further weaken the domestic ecosystem. And now we would like to discuss regarding the diamonds and jewelry sector. So in the diamond and jewelry sector, we should having $11.9 billion exports and auto parts $2.2 billion face 25% tariffs. So the matter worrisome as US is a major buyer, especially chemical footwear and processed foods are also demand stocks. And in field of regarding pharmaceuticals, India's top export, which constitutes $12.7 billion, which remains tariff free, though reducing dependency on Chinese APIs is crucial. And now we would like to discuss in the field of agriculture. And agriculture will be hit unevenly. Shrimp and dairy exports may decline while rice exports remain largely unaffected. And so petroleum exports are exempted from the tariff regime. So India faces more significant pressure than most countries, which have to absorb only Trump tariffs. As India negotiates a free trade deal with United States, it must contend with broader American demands beyond tariffs. The 2025 National Trade Estimates report released by United States on March 31st outlines Washington's key demands from India. So those key demands made by United States were in regarding the field in agriculture. United States wants India to reform its MSP system for rice and wheat, allow GM food, genetically modified food imports, and lower tariffs on farm products. Washington also wants India to amend its Patents Act to allow ever greening apparatus that extend patent protection for older drugs and delays generic alternatives, and particularly in the field of e-commerce. United States demands the removal of restrictions on inventory-based models, allowing Amazon and Walmart to sell directly to Indian consumers. Other demands include granting USA firms access to government contracts, including defense. These are all demands, and very though demands made by the United States. Some of them will have huge social consequences if accepted by the government of India. So, in brief, we have discussed the April 2 Liberation Day tariffs imposed by the Trump administration, varying from 10% to 54% over 180 countries in the world, and specifically targeted countries like Canada, Mexico, China, European Union countries, and in particularly those countries which are imposing tariffs on USA exports to such countries like Cambodia, imposing a 97% tariffs on USA goods sold to Vietnam, which is imposing 90% tariff on USA goods sold to China, which is collecting 67% tariffs on USA goods. So in that connection, we have discussed in brief about the Liberation Day tariffs imposed by Donald Trump administration. And also we have discussed the Liberation Day tariffs and the background of US tariffs and its imposition on those imports from India, in particularly in the field of textile and garments, and the very impact it would be over those exports to United States in the field of textile, garments, electronics and telecom, diamonds and jewelry, agriculture. Even though pharmaceuticals was left under the tariffs imposed by United States on the very Liberation Day on April 2, 2025. And in particularly, also we have discussed certain key demands made by Washington and the USA administration on India to do certain reforms in the field of agriculture, and in particularly in connection to those reforms in the field of MSP system and allowing the genetically modified food imports. So also the demand to reform patent acts of India. So also by demanding removal of restriction on inventory-based models, allowing Amazon and Walmart to sell directly to Indian consumers. So all these demands met by United States administration or Donald Trump's administration are although though demands very difficult to be carried out, but some of them will have definitely huge social consequences if such key demands of United States are accepted by the Indian government.